Welcome back. So when you are walking out of your house or you're getting out of a taxi or in a car, do you sort of pat yourself down thinking, I've forgotten something, and then you realize it's your face mask and you don't actually have to wear it anymore? So strange to not have to wear a face mask in public or at work, but some workplaces are asking, or maybe even demanding, that workers keep their face masks on. Osborne Molatudi is the MD and Employment and Labour Law Specialist at Molatudi Attorneys. Osborne, good afternoon to you. Can your boss insist that you keep wearing a face mask even when there's no regulation around it?
Thank you, Stephen, for having me on your show again. Oh, yes. The other day I was talking to one of your colleagues. The challenge that we have at the moment is that the code on managing COVID-19 in the workplace is still applicable. It has not been repealed. But more importantly, Stephen, we still have the critical piece of legislation called the Occupational Health and Safety. And in terms of this legislation, and for many years it has been like that, is that it places an obligation on an employer to keep and maintain a safe workplace. And added to that, there are regulations that have been published in terms of this act, and one of which is it's called Biological Hazardous Agents Regulations, which lists COVID-19 as one of the identified agents or virus. And then it requires employers to do a risk assessment, the same process as before, to do a risk assessment, identify where risks are, and to put in a plan on how to mitigate those risks, and one of which may be to require its employees to continue wearing masks. Of course, you and I know that the general criticism is that how can ministers talk past each other? How can the left know what is don't know what is happening on the right-hand side? The answer is that the OSH Act and the regulations have not been repealed. But we know that Minister Joe Phaahla has repealed the NHA, certain regulations that require people to wear masks in the public. And that's where we are at the moment, and it's going to create a great debate going forward.
Okay, I'm going to scratch my head first because I'm going to try and understand this. But my understanding was that after the announcement last week from the Health Minister, we're all back in the legal position we were before COVID. What you're saying is that's true, just not for labour law. No,
just for workplaces. I think let's just try and clarify to your viewers. For workplaces, employers still have an obligation to maintain a safe workplace. And one of the ways to go about it is to do exactly what I've highlighted earlier on. And that's what confuses many people. So you're quite right in your introduction. You can get into a taxi having forgotten the mask, but when you get to your workplace, that employer may say, in terms of my risk assessment, I still require all of you or employees in certain sections to still wear a mask, because that is in a workplace. And that's where the confusion comes about, because the code on managing COVID-19 in the workplace is applicable. In fact, it was recently published now on the 24th of June, in terms of which the minister was repealing the February 2022 code. Yeah.
Okay. So when you say that the employer has to make a decision, so the boss makes a decision, could it be, let's just say for argument's sake, there are two buildings that look exactly the same in, I don't know, Sandton, right, or the Joburg CBD, and they've each got 100 people in, and they're the same size. Could the people who run those buildings come to two different decisions about whether the people in them need to wear face masks? Because it's up to them, isn't it?
It is possible, Stephen. It will all be based on the risk assessment. It is possible. The employer in one building conduct the risk assessment. By the way, again, as I said, I didn't want to repeat the previous process. That risk assessment is conducted with the engagement of stakeholders in the workplace, be it trade unions or employee representative. So after the conducting of that risk assessment, they will then be in a position to identify whether there are risks, whether there are vulnerable people, whether there are employees with underlying conditions, and if so, what measures are we taking to prevent, to protect them from the spread of the COVID-19 virus or any other hazard that has been identified in that workplace. So to answer your question, yes.
During the state of disaster, it was up to us to get our own face masks. And I don't think anyone ever said, you know, this is how it is, but that's what happened, right? It became common practice you would get your own face mask. Now there's no state of disaster. Government has repealed the regulations. So now, if it is the case that one employer could say you need to wear face masks, and one could come to the completely opposite decision and say you don't need to wear face masks, if as a worker you're forced to wear a face mask at work, could you now go to your boss and say that's fine, but you have to pay for it?
Oh yes. Employees can at liberty to really exercise their discretion. One of the points that I highlighted, Stephen, is the issue of voluntarism. I think with the repeal of the NHA regulations on the compulsory wearing of masks, easing of restrictions on movements, in fact, banning the restrictions altogether, entry into our country, is that it now pushes the responsibility on us as citizens to exercise care when it comes to our health and safety. But unfortunately, when it comes to the workplace, the obligation rests on the employer. There's a reason for this, Stephen, for the benefit of your viewers. If anything happens in that workplace, you and I know very well that the buck stops with the employer. The inspector will come in and assess what happened, what is it that you had in place, what risk assessment did you conduct, what steps did you take to mitigate the risk or to avoid the spread, etc. So, you know, it's a 50-50 situation for employers. You do, you are damned. You don't, you are damned. And again, I want to repeat, if anything happens in a particular workplace where there is no wearing of mask and one of the employees get affected, contract the virus, etc., I can tell you, after everything said and done, that employer may face the possibility of being sued. But at the same time, those employees who may ignore an employer's instruction to wear masks also run the risk of being dismissed. That is, we're going to now see the increase in insubordination cases. For whatever reasons, the employee may refuse. And that's the challenge we're going to have going forward with this code of practice managing COVID in the workplace.
I would imagine also it depends on the type of business that you're in. So if you're working with food, if you're seeing a large number of people, I mean, the classic case, the people who are probably more exposed, there are two kinds of people who probably be more exposed to COVID than anyone else. The one is people who work at the checkout of a supermarket, who are working through all the way through COVID, and the other is taxi drivers. I mean, I would imagine there are two people, a boss might easily say, please wear a face mask, or you must wear a face mask.
Indeed, Stephen, it will depend on the nature of the industry. Most of my colleagues have the view that mining definitely may continue to retain the use of masks. Retail, especially where there's still an exposure to customers, you know, and other people may want to retain the use of masks. The only place I visited on the announcement of the repeal of the regulations was collecting my car at the dealership, which was in for service. And I saw most of the workers there not wearing their mask. And you can see that it was a different environment altogether. I'm hesitant to say they were excited, you know, because you can't be excited if you are likely to be exposed to an unknown risk. So yes, it will depend on the nature of each industry. We have visited malls very recently. You saw there's no security guard standing at the entrance requiring us to only enter if we are wearing masks. So it's quite interesting. And for me, from an employment law perspective, I say to employees, if there is an instruction given to you in terms of a policy that has not been repealed, just obey the instruction and not risk being subjected to a disciplinary process, which may result in the termination of your employment.
Osborne Molatudi, thank you, MD for Employment and Labour Law Specialist at Molatudi Attorneys. I do appreciate it. Well,